I have been asked the question on a couple of occasions is how do I take a pile of this and make this blank piece of towel have a complete gun on it? Well, there's this illusion that I actually know what I'm doing, and I really don't. I'm kind of feeling my way through, but most guns have a stock. Check. Body tube. Check. So we got a stock and we got a body tube. Now we're going to push that up out of the way here and go into major functional groups. I kind of know, we know a few things. We know that that's where the mags plug in. And we know that it's going to go through that hole in the side of the body tube. We know we got a bolt. We got a firing pin. Butt plate, right? That goes back there. Some kind of trigger group. That gizmo looks like a trigger. So that probably goes with that. Don't really know what this is yet, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. That's an amorphous looking piece of metal. We'll figure that out. That looks like a feed ramp. All right, so we know that's going to have to go in there somewhere. That's a barrel. Yeah, because it's got those little twisty little groovy things in it. That's the thing that goes on the front. We don't really know, but it's got interrupted threads. It's got threads. My point is, all of these parts have clues. They have clues as to where they go, but it's going to get tricky here in a minute. All right, this thing, oh look, there's screw holes on the bottom that kind of matches up. So that probably goes right there. This has a little hook gizmo, which fits under that. All right, hang on a minute here now. That looks like some kind of sling swivel. I don't know what that piece is. I don't know what that piece is. I don't know what that is. All right, now we're left with a pile of screws. We know that this is the extractor, because we had spent some time working on that. Various springs, parts. So we've got it into this big pile now of possible functional groups. And now we have this entire pile here of screws. So where do all these screws and pins go? I really don't know. And you would think for a guy that's had his MP18 apart as many times as I have, that I would know exactly where they all go. But there's a couple of ways you can immediately figure this pile of gack out. Well, that had the cross hatching on it. So that probably goes to that piece. There's another spring. We'll worry about the springs here in a minute. Let's see. Big screw with a smooth part on it. Probably the trunnion gizmo that goes right there. That looks like a rear sight. So that's going to wind up somewhere up there by the rear sight, right? Okay, that goes there. Now, we're down to just pure screws. That's a goofy looking spring. Let's take a quick look at that spring right here. That spring is actually made out of flat steel. Check that noise out. This is the magazine release spring. So we'll set this over here by the magazine release thing, and then the other piece there that was there. So now we're down to pins and screws, totally. All right, well, you take the big screws and you stack them up and you look at the one with the most screwed up head. And the big screws with the most screwed up head, almost without exception, the big screw with the screwed up head, this one right here, almost without exception, that's going to be the screw that goes in the top of the butt plate. Because that's the one that gets ground into the ground all the time. And the rest of these actually look pretty. I haven't cleaned these screw heads up. You guys have seen me clean up screw heads, but I haven't done that. So we know that's going to go to the top of the butt plate. And then the next most horked up one, you sort them kind of by length. That's the next most horked up one, which means these two right here, I'm going to make a trade. These two right here probably go to this rear sling swivel. So what we're beginning to do is reduce the screw count down by the ones we know what they do. And then we'll be left with a couple that we don't. So now you're not messing with 30 screws, you're only messing with 5 or 6 of them. Big wood screw, big wood screw. I remember seeing something that had holes in it right there. So that's pretty obviously these. So those will go there. What have we got here? Okay. There are 4 screws that are identical, but are they? And I'm actually going to set these down so that they're not in my hand here. So do me a favor and pull me some focus there. If we can look, and we're at max zoom, right? Okay. A couple of these screws actually have slots cut in them. This one right here. So let me roll this around so you can see it. There's a slot there. Let me get some white up against the back. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to put that yellow back here behind it. So hang on a minute. I'm working at arm's length. There we go. Right there. There you go. Pull it up. There it is. You see that slot cut right there in the side of that screw over there by my thumbnail? That slot is actually going to take a pin for locking it, and we'll cover that. So 2 of these have slots, 2 of them don't. So they're actually delineated. And I'm looking at the bottom of this trigger guard looking gizmo here. And the bottom of this trigger guard gizmo has actually got holes in it. There's a hole there and a hole there. And what those holes are going to do is lock the heads of these screws without staking them. We'll get to that in a minute. So we know there's one right there with the slot cut in it. That one doesn't. This one does. So the two with the slots in them are going to go here. We're going to need 2 pins to lock that with. So we're going to need to go find 2 pins that are about the same. And we'll have to work on that here a little bit later. Because that's right, because one of them was missing. I remember that. All right, so the 2 that didn't have the slotting are probably the ones that hold, geez, I don't even know where the heck those go. Right there, look at that. There's 2 slots right, there's 2 screws right there. And these are designed to be held. You see that big round spot? So when we put these in, we'll find out which screw allows us to line the head up like that. And then when we take a punch and whack it right there, we'll fold a little bit of metal into that screw slot and keep it from rotating. So now we know where those go. And trust me, guys, it's this arbitrary. I'm brailing my way through it just like you are. We got various wood screws. There's a long, couple of shorts. So we're going to line all these up right here. We'll take a look at that. So what do we need? We need one for the trigger guard, and then we need 2 for that. So a long one there, because this part here, we know we need the long screw to go through there, and then the 2 short ones go in there. So that's kind of how we have to do that. So that'll give us 1, 2, 3 over there. These 2 are here for the trigger guard. Now we've got this odd spring. Okay, that goes up there. That's the front sight. All right, this is all for the trigger housing. That should push on that. That's got to go there. We need a pin that's about the right size. Oh, look at that. See, that pin fits in that hole. This pin is too small, so that doesn't go there. And that pin's too short, so that doesn't go there. So that leaves that. What else have we got here? These 2 are the trunnion locks. I know that because I just made them. We'll talk about those in a little bit. 2 big fat ones. Where would the big fat... here's 2 holes that look about right. We're back into this trigger housing again. And we see those 2 big old holes right there. And those 2 big holes take these pins. Bang, bang. So now we know these pins go in there. The other tip off is that they're about the right thickness. See, if these pins were a lot longer... I got to get my fingers out of there. Can't see through my fat fingers. That pin's exactly the right length. So not only is it the right length and right diameter, it probably goes in those holes. Because at the end of the day, this is not a complicated gun. If you hear some ripping and snorting coming out of the back of the room, Otheus has got one of those old shotguns of his back there, and my God, you think there's a lot of parts in this thing. Yikes. once you've done all that, now you have subgroups. So what am I going to mess with first? All right, well, I'm going to set the bolt over here, firing pin over there. This gizmo threads on the back of the firing pin. We'll talk about that. And we're going to move everything out of the way that we're not going to mess with first. Butt plate screws, action spring goes out of the way. We don't really care about sling swivels yet. This is going to go in a stock. Point being is you can start knocking this number down very, very quickly. So we know we've got some assembly to do here. And then we'll come back in and oil all this later. We're going to put it together dry. We got some assembly to do. And then you just put together the things that can be gotten out of the way in a hurry. That can be gotten out of the way in the hurry. So that goes over here. You start putting together the sub-assemblies. This trigger component group is going to be a big deal. I can feel that coming right now. So let's see here. Spring. Gizmo. So we've got the spring in there. We'll put that up inside. Right there like that. And then this will go on right there. And then that just screws itself in. Okay. And right before I make that disappear, a little bit of oil. Run some oil down in there. Take a scrubby brush and just make sure we get up underneath this. We'll come back in and oil all this when we go to put it together. Put that in there like that. And then we know we got it. And make sure it checks clear. Right. And then while we're at this, we'll just put a couple of drops of oil down in here. Take a toothbrush. Nothing crazy, your favorite gun oil. I happen to like the Lucas stuff because it just works. Had a lot of success with that with Lead Star. We did a lot of AR-15s with that stuff and it just worked for us. Okay, here we go. Just give that a good scrubby dubby on the inside. Get up inside the magwell here. Okay, so that sub-assembly is basically together. So we can take that sub-assembly, set it off, keep moving. Is there anything to this? Not really. We don't have to worry about that yet. This is a trigger part. This is the ejector trunnion bolt. Good. So far, so good. So it looks like there's the only detail assembly is going to be down here on the bottom. And if I remember right, I want to put this together on the gun. So we're going to stop, reset, get up on top of the universal work holding device, and move on. Having ascertained that the slotted screws go inside the trigger housing, I'm going to go ahead and mount the trigger housing right now and just kind of milk these screws down and see where the slots are. That's the slot right there. That's got to go in about another turn. Or see where the slots are right there. Hang on. Nope, got them in the wrong holes. Because it matters where the threads begin inside the receiver housing. So just like on an A5, where technically the screws that hold the carrier are technically, they fit on either side. They really don't. They were actually drilled for their locking screws after they were mounted. And you can tell, let's see, right there. Yeah, you see? And what I'm doing is I'm looking through the hole and I'm picking that slot up as I'm looking through the hole. Let's see here where it is. Right darn near right there. That's the slot. So it's got to come around one more turn. Let's see here if this can be milked down. No, I'm not happy with that. So we're going to swap them again. So it looks like I'm a little bit hit or miss here. And the point I'm trying to make about all this is if you walk up on something and you have no idea. Of course I know how this gun goes together, guys. I've been in and out of this thing so many times. I've actually done it in my sleep. That's not the point. The point is that they leave clues. And you can walk up on a bag of gun parts and figure out exactly where you want to be and what you want to do by using your brain. Unstow the brain housing group. Okay, you just got to be smarter than that. All right, we're going to put that in there and see where that would have come out. Right there. We've got to go around half. One more complete turn. Yeah, we're going to get that right here. Okay, I'll bring that up till that lock and sleeve comes in line. Okay, and we'll see if we can get it. So yeah, I know what I'm doing, but the whole point was by dumping out the bag of screws is that don't be intimidated by it. Be smarter than the gear. There it is. Now we got them in the right holes. We'll come in from behind because I'm a right-handed guy, and we'll drive these pins in from behind because I prefer to swing the hammer like this. And just let the hammer do the work. But if I'm trying to drive this way in order to show you that the pin's actually going in the hole, all that does is just, I'm out of position. Okay, here we go. So that's in. So now this unit is locked to the bottom, but if you need to take it out, you're not having to stake an unstaked metal. Next issue that we're going to have going on here, we have 2 pins, and we have a trigger gizmo, and we have a rod. So here's what we've got up inside the bottom of the gun. There's the trigger, and the trigger obviously moves in and out. So this rod right here is going to be pushed forward when you pull the trigger, and as it's pushed forward, it's going to cause this. Let me get my hands out of the way here. There's a slot in the end of this rod. There's the slot. This protrusion down here is sticking through that slot. So as we push forward on this bar, this edge is going to pivot down and is going to allow the bolt, which is being held right here on that surface. That's actually the sear surface right there. The bolt's being held there, and as that rotates down, the bolt's allowed to slide forward and cause another chain of events to occur that we're going to talk about later. So knowing that, there's a cut on the bottom of this. So if I had to be a venturing guy, I'd say the cut goes on the bottom right there so that as the trigger pushes, it's actually pushing forward on the tangent and not trying to slide up and down this edge. So we're going to put it together that way. I happen to know it goes this way, but I'm trying to discuss the thought process that goes into feeling your way through one of these things if you don't understand what it is you're looking at. Now, because we've already put it together, let's see here which way we want to get with it. That's going to fit in here and it's going to pivot like this. Now, does that make sense? No, it needs to go this way because we're trying to keep the bolt from sliding forward. So because we're trying to keep the bolt from sliding forward, it has to face the recess, the back of the bolt. So this will be sticking in that slot like this. And does that make sense? If that's sitting there like that, and this then is the pinhole, this makes sense because this is exactly where the thing is. And when you put it in safe, it comes back, rotates up and sits in that notch, and it's not sitting on this here. So let's get this assembled here and get her oiled and keep moving down to the next step then. This is going to be interesting because this has got to go through a hole. It's got to go through a hole. There's a spring-loaded plunger that has to sit in there. So it appears like this will go in first and then sit out of the way. Okay, small pliers, small pliers. Okay, and then pin. We'll just get an assembly pin here. That will sit up in there, and then as that hole comes through, I'm just going to grab it. Now that kind of falls out of the way. And then we'll take this main pin, push through from the back. Now you can't see this, but I'm actually running a pin into a hole from the back end back here. And what we're gonna do now, let's see, we gotta hang on to that and chase it. Now, as you can see, I'm moving this punch around, and what I'm doing by moving it is I'm grabbing that part in there and I'm walking it around until the front end of the pin goes into it, and then the pin will come through it, and then eventually it'll just chase this assembly pin right out. And we want to make sure that the pin is starting in here, because we don't want to beat on this and have it actually blow the back side of this out. And I've actually come behind things that have happened that way. Another thing I'll show you. That's a 2, that's a 6. While we're hitting on this, we're actually stressing these screws. So one of the things you can do is put this hammer right here, and as you're tapping on that pin, you're bucking into this mass. Now that pin is completely lined up and in there without stressing these screws as you're making that assembly. So then the next item we have to do is we'll have to lift that up. We'll come in from behind here, long screwdriver, spring. So we'll take the spring and put it up in the hole. Now a trick to making springs stay up in the hole is to get just a small amount of grease. Take a small dab of this grease and just put it on the spring. And now we can stick this spring up in the hole and it won't jump out on us. That grease is just tacky enough that it'll hang on to it. And yet, it's something I was going to grease the gun with anyway. So that little trick really works for hanging on to stuff and sticking pins in holes when you don't want them to go anywhere. So that will go in. This is going to push in here, and then we're going to intercept this by lifting up on that hammer notch. So let me get that right there. I got to go a little bit further, a little bit further. Okay, there we go. This intercepts that. There it is, right there. So I can roll this towards you just a little bit so that you can see it. And right there is what I'm talking about. Now, while we have this over, if I turn this loose, this will come shooting out. But what keeps that from falling through, it lays up against that back pin, and that's what keeps it from falling out. So in our particular case, we'll run that right there, and we'll go ahead and we'll drive this pin in the back end. Now we'll do a function check right now. We'll grab the bolt and we'll stick the bolt up inside of it. Now as the bolt's coming in, it hits the sear. You lift that out of the way. That sits on a sear, and with forward spring pressure, when you push, it comes forward. So that's what we're doing there. And then of course in a safe position, this has absolutely no control and the recoil spring is pushing forward. So you come out of safe, set it up, and then that's how it goes off. One of the theories about what the I means on this gun, it says MP18I, is that this sight was cut and its main leaf was jettisoned. Nobody really knows. It'll be covered in much deeper detail later. But for right now, we're putting a rear sight back together again just because I want to get off the outside of this body tube, and I don't want to try to do it when we have a bunch of stuff in the way. Okay, I'll put a little bit of oil in there. We'll just scrub it down because this is probably the last time the bottom of this is going to see the light of day for a while. So again, if you didn't know what you've got, this has a dovetail on it. Let's see here if we can get the dovetail. Yeah, you see how it's wider on the left than it is on the right? So dovetail, screw hole, it leaves clues. We just tap that in there. But then I'm wondering, is it going to be a pain in the neck to push the sight in? Yeah, it's probably going to be 6 to 1, half a dozen to another. So we'll just go ahead and kind of Milk that up there. We never really did identify the rear sight screw. So now we'll check through our list of screws that we don't know where they all go. This is an odd man out. That looks about right. Let's see here. We'll just screw that in. Okay. That's down. Now, sometimes when you're handling these screws, you get some sharp edges on it. Once again, polished hammer face. And I'm not hitting this very hard. I got this pinched in my fingers. You just come back in and just tap the top of these screws. It takes all those sharp edges right off of it. Doesn't impact any finish, doesn't mess anything up, but it just kind of got to have polished hammer faces for this though. Okay. So when you're looking at a rear sight, you'll see, let me get the light to shine off this just right there. You see how there's like an ocular in the back here, and then this, optimally, this gap right here should be 0 thickness. This right here should taper to as thin as it can, and then it's got a flat back on it, so you're looking through it in the direction that the pencil is pointing. And what that gives you is a nice, clean, crisp edge for your eye to look through. If this was a hole drilled through a piece of pipe, the further you go this way, you actually get a parallax effect, and it's like looking down a tunnel. It's like looking down a tunnel. Uncomfortable. So we've now noted then that we know that the line of sight, we're looking through it that way. You'll know when you put one on backwards. In this particular case, we got numbers written on it, and the numbers pretty much have to face towards the operator. So we know that this probably goes on this way. Push this down into position, stick a line-up pin through it because we don't want to be fighting all that spring tension. Tell you what, I'm going to get a little thicker line-up pin because that punch is kind of wimpy. So now I got the line-up pin in there holding that down. Then we'll take this pin right here, stick it in the hole, and suck that one corner down. And I'm holding upward pressure with my finger right now because I want this to be down a little bit so that as the edge of the pin gets there, this doesn't spring up when driving the pin into the back wall, and that's not a good thing. Again, we'll buck it. Here we go. We're there, and we get both settings, a 100 and 200 meter, which is probably, actually, this thing doesn't bounce around much when you shoot it. You can actually hit stuff with it. Unlike a lot of these other ones that we've shot where they run all right, but, you know, I can understand what the meaning of getting showed is. We're going to put the magazine mount back on the outside of this, but there is an assembly order that has to be obeyed here or you'll get tripped up. Because the barrel, one of the things we found when we tried to cut the old barrel out was that the forward magazine swivel stud got trapped. So there's an order that all of this has to go together in, and that we have learned by difficult trial and error. So we'll put a little bit of oil here. I've just got a little bit of oil on this toothbrush. So this is the ejector. That's the part that's going to catch the round and flip it out of the gun. A little bit more oil here. And you'll see some of this orange. This is all just smut. None of this is rust. It's smut from the conversion process, and we pick it up right here at the end with a little bit. You're looking at this gun, and you go, wow, this thing's pretty simple. Can you build my parts kit? Well, I got news for you guys. You can't take an open bolt gun, re-engineer it to go closed bolt semi-automatic, and think that that's going to get done for $30 or $40. It's not. There's a reason why those parts kits are so cheap. It's because it's very, very difficult to actually make an operational gun out of one. Okay, so that's going to slide up there. And as we can see then, this is indexed not by the screws, but by the action of the fact that the ejector is actually over the back. Now we're going to use inertia in our favor. I'm just going to drop it on the desk a little bit here. You have to kind of hit it. We're almost there. Okay, I'm looking. May have to stick a spud down in the holes and very gently slide that back. Nope, a little bit more. Gonna really cream it this time. There we go. Now we're lined up. Hoorah. So, now we have the screws that were staked the last time. Boy, that's gotta go even a little bit more here. So let's massage this back a bit. So the brass hammer hits the metal, and the hammer hits the brass hammer. I'm gonna have to hit it even harder than that. Here, hang on. Okay, almost. And now we're there. Okay. Thank you, sir. Screw and screw. Okay, so those screws go in there, and we'll drive those home here with an appropriate screwdriver. Don't have to kill these things because all of the rotational and fore and aft work is being done for us. So the previous guy had staked that right there. That's not going to come around that far. We can swap holes. So let's just swap holes and take a look. Right now, we know we've got slot line up right there, and we've got slot line up right there. I don't even know if you can see that, but there's a pencil mark. Whenever given two options, always try them both when you're putting a relatively unfamiliar gun back together again. So this is just general advice. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, so we'll bring that up tight. Nope, it's going to come up to about the same spot. Okay, let's see here. Chase that in. We may not have gained anything by swapping screws, and we really didn't. We didn't gain anything, so we're going to leave them alone. Now, these screws went into the body tube. Ooh, that one's still sucking down there. Okay. So I'm looking up inside the body tube, and I realize now, inside the body tube, you're going to have to refocus on that, right? Hang on a minute, right there in the square, and then, wait a minute, I gotta see what the heck it is I'm trying to see. Right there, okay. So you see that screw down in there? What I want you to focus on is the end of the pencil right there. I want the end of the pencil to show up. There it is, right there. So that little shiny spot right there, which we're having a hard time getting lit right. There we go. That's actually the end of that forward screw sticking out into the bolt raceway. So we can't use that alignment, and I've got to go back to the original. I'm just trying to take you guys through the thought process of what's going on here. So we're going to pull this one out, and we're going to switch them back around again. Okay, hold on a minute. Let me just switch this around, and then we'll stake them. And then we'll stake them. Okay, get out of there. I'll put this back up front, and we'll see. Because I don't know if these screws were shortened 100 and something years ago. I mean, they're all one of a kind. So you're going back in after somebody that did something a long time ago. So you don't really know all the decisions that happened before you. Okay, here we go. So now I'll run my finger up inside there, and now it's smooth. Now the screws are not sticking out. We can verify. We'll verify by running the bolt down over the ejector all the way forward till it stops. There are no obstructions, so it's not hanging up on any of the screws. The time to find that out is before we do the next thing we're about to do, which is reassemble the whole front end. And somehow we got to get this fished all the way up in there so it sticks through the only square hole in the deal. So we're getting ready to put the back end of the gun together. And I'll tell you that on his spring break, one of my apprentices, John, he goes to Avapai College for gunsmithing. And I have to tell you what, they have taught this cat a few things. Because on the left was my original primitive weld this piece on, play around with making a rear trunnion block kind of deal. And then once we drew it all, John made this sexy one-piece block. Look at that. He Prussian blued this thing so that the mag sits right in here. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Put a little bit of oil on this. That rear trunnion, the barrel plugs into that. And then you can see that divot in there. And then there's a hole here. So that divot will line up with that hole when this is all put back together again. And there will be a screw that comes in, comes through the rear trunnion and kind of pins the barrel. And that whole thing keeps the barrel and everything else from moving around. And then fore to aft movement is denied by this ring, which slides over the top here. And then it's held in by the front sight, which slides over the top of it. So that's the stack. And in the middle of all that, we have to try to figure out how we're going to put the front sight in this thing. So let's just slide this bad boy in here. I mean the rear sight, I'm sorry, the rear swivel. So that's going to go up right about there. Okay, and we're just going to put a, I know what we can do. Here's a novel idea. We can put the actual rear trunnion screw in there. We're just going to kind of tack this in right here just to keep it from sliding fore to aft. Now, the original one that we took to range day, I made that rear trunnion out of a block of steel that was so hard we couldn't even thread it because I was kind of stupid. So we came back and we made this one out of a piece of cold roll. And it's, of course, kicking my butt here trying to just simply try to screw it. There we go. So all I've got that in there is to keep it from going fore and aft. Now we got to pull the barrel back out. And we got to take this nice little jury rig gizmo here, slide this in here and up through that square hole there. And then we'll run, what do we want to put through that? We'll put something a little more beef through it. Let's stick that through it so that it'll still fall out, but it'll just have a harder time. Naturally, the tape stuck to the block and not to the screwdriver. There we go. So that's in. So then we can come back in with the barrel. Again, we want to index that hole somewhere near there, just so we got some idea if we're close or not. Lift up on that and stick all that in there. Okay, now we can set that down there. And now it's captured and it can't come out. I'm sure it'll find out a way to come out because I know I probably cut something too small. So why don't we just keep that from coming out and do this? Where did we put that? So we'll just capture that and prevent it from coming out by laying this swivel over it. Let's get back up in here with the screwdriver. Stick that back up in there. None of this was designed to come apart in the field, obviously. Okay, there we go. We'll lay that right there. Stick that in there. And then that can't come out and bite us in the butt. Okay. Run that up there. Okay, got that there. I'm going to take this screw back out and rotate the barrel. I'm going to look down on the hole for the divot. And we'll see here if we can't. There it is. There's the divot down on the bottom. I can see it. You can't. There's no way I'm going to show it to you. One of the things that I've found helpful is to come in from the back and just stick the bolt up inside of it. That establishes the rearwardmost position. And then we're back down here in the vise again. And now that's going to hold the trunnion forward for us and allow me to find that divot mark right there. You just got to trust me. I found it. I have the front of this screw kind of cut in order to have like a small point on it. All right, I'll get that threaded in there. That has to be lined up exactly right. We were given some photographs of this different kinds of MP18s. There were two different ways, it appears, of securing this trunnion ring. Our particularly serialized unit had this dual kind of Mauser looking locking ring on it. So I've made us a screw here that has the cutout in it. We tighten that up there, and then we run this little locking gizmo right down on top of it. Sorry, we're working through my hands here, guys. You just gotta trust me, there's a screw going in a hole here. Okay, right there. And then that's gonna lock that up. That feels like that's going in crooked. There it is, right there. So now, let me go ahead and pull that the rest of the way down. Don't have to gorilla this. All you're trying to do is keep it from walking out of the hole. Good Lord, everything's sticking to that. There we go. So now we've got that nice clean setup, just like one of the originals that we were looking at. Very good. Last thing now is to take this. This is the forward mount here, the forward ring, and it's threaded on the inside and has holes for air escape, breathing, place to get a tool in there. We'll thread this in. Now I'm going to roll the barrel up and show you what's actually going on here as we start to lock this. Here we go. Am I still in the center? All right. We can just come in here like this and spin that in. And then I found just a pair of chain nose pliers works really well here for rotating this. We can just come in here and very gently not scratch it up and roll, and you'll see now we're just about all the way in, and we overshot this one turn. There we go. So you see that flat spot right there? That flat spot is going to be held by the front sight, and we'll slide the front sight here through the dovetail, and it appears that it likes to go in this way. Nope, it's going to go in the other way. It's going to come in this way like this. There we go. We'll use a brass hammer and just kind of massage that. Now the dovetail's holding on to it, and then the presence of the front sight keeps that ring from rotating. And then there's a mark on the front. We've got the mark on the front lined up with the mark on the body tube. And now we have the rear trunnion, barrel, forward trunnion, front sight setup all lined up here and ready to rock. We're getting pretty close, so let's go mount everything on a stock and go from there. There are various, there are some opinions about whether or not the grease behind butt plates. I put a very, very thin coating of lithium grease on the back end of a butt plate here just because I have seen too much stuff growing behind these butt plates in order to not have an opinion about that. Fly in here with the screws. And like I said, the most messed up screw to the whole group is the one you put right there, because that's the one that's always messed up. On muzzle loaders especially. This one not so bad. Nobody really grounded this thing, but come up and kiss that. We don't have to kill it. Come in here, come up and kiss this. We don't have to kill it. Now obviously, as the wood has given way over time, these screws are out of time, and I'm going to make no attempt to bring that screw around almost a half a turn and make all the slots line up. It's a military weapon. It's not happening. Okay, and that actually don't look too bad. Okay. Again, we're underneath, so I'm just going to put a dab of grease on them. Just so that you don't want too much, you don't want to soak the wood, but just because this thing's going to go outside. I got news for you. Sea and Arsenal's planning on campaigning this thing. They're going to run it. They're going to take it out in the weather. They're going to go to meets with it. They're going to do all kinds of stuff with it. And I'm setting this thing up to run. This is not a hanger queen, not a safe queen. So we're actually setting her up to run. I just had that discussion with a gentleman that had me conserve his 1873 Winchester. I asked him the question. I said, it runs. We've shot it. Are you going to campaign this gun and compete with it? Or is it just, he had told me that he's having it done so that future generations could also examine it. And I'm going to tell you what, this thing was scroty when we got down inside of it. There was mung everywhere, lots of rust, lots of verdigris on the brass, everything. But what I asked him was, are you going to campaign the gun? Because if that's the case, we're going to have to do some things to it to really set it up to make it run. There were some clearances that we're going to have to get welded. There were some things that we're going to have to get done, like if he was a SAS shooter, are you bringing this back because you want to actually run original equipment? He didn't want to. He wasn't going to. He just wanted to have it so that it wouldn't die, so that his kids and his grandkids could enjoy it. Well, in this particular case, the owners have every intention of running this thing, and I have every intention of setting it up for them and doing that extra thing, which is grease under the studs, grease underneath the forward mounting block. Just a little bit, just a little bit. You don't need to kill this. You don't need to have squeeze out when you put it in. Just a little bit. Right? Okay, so that's going to set in there like that. That's going to set down there. And then we're going to grab the short screws, because we know that we don't have a lot of depth here. So these had to be the short ones. And we'll run these in. I have no way of tipping this for you guys to see this. This is just 2 wood screws going down on a hole. Hang on a second. You don't have to kill a wood screw. You just walk until it sets. Put a little scrunch on it. This is not head bolts on a Chevrolet 350. The torque spec on these screws is not honk them down, they squeak, and give them another quarter turn. Yikes! All right, we're upside down here. Now we're going to go in and run the trigger group. Again, white lithium grease, garden variety. You don't have to pay a gazillion dollars for this stuff, but just a little bit of it. I'm sure I will hear one way or the other, because like most guys on the internet, some people swear by me and some people swear at me, and that's just the way it is. All right, that sits in there like that. All right, 2 more of these wood screws. This one here was pretty knackered, so I'm assuming that this goes back here where the guy's hands are around it. Just an assumption, just me banging off the walls here. Okay, here we go. Now I'm guiding this with my fingers so that I don't let the screwdriver slip out and bang up against the metalwork. Plus I've got that white lithium on my fingers, so they're slippery. So this is actually not a half bad evolution to do. Get a correctly fitted screwdriver blade, run it home, run it down till it cinches. Now these screws haven't been in and out so much. Yeah, that looks good. All right. Last thing here is the rear swivel mount. Be careful when you're cranking down on this vise that you don't eggshell this. Pop it. You don't crack it that way. How do I know that? Okay. A little bit more. Okay, and then we're going to get around to talking about the internals. Pretty well thought out gun, actually. Now, while we're doing all this, the amount of parts on the bench is, disappearing quickly. Wrong screwdriver. We'll try this. Okay. Those of you that are wondering, I did conserve this entire gun. It was put through, that was the first thing we did once we cut it apart. We ran it through the steam scalder and went ahead and scalded it, and then all this beautiful finish came popping up from underneath it. And this is what it winds up looking like. And this is the same gun we took to range day. We just had the time now to come back. We were under a real time gun going to range day. We got it running with like an hour to spare. We were out of there the next morning. Okay, so here we go now. We still pretty much centered up. Okay. Now we'll take the forward trunnion screw. There we go. That'll go in there. Rotate. That comes down there. Right? Okay. And once we make sure that all of this runs exactly right, then we're going to worry about those two outside screws back there that we needed to center pop. That's the very last thing we're going to do, because once I center pop those two screws, once we set these two screws right here, coming out requires us to drill the holes out. So I want to make sure the gun works first, and then we'll go ahead and do that, if anybody was wondering. Okay. So then, that leaves us, let me do a complete reset here. Right there. That's exactly where I want to be, right up here. Okay. This is one unique spring. It has a really odd wire size, which means it has to fit over this guide stud, but it has to fit inside the firing pin. So I made a new firing pin here, and we've threaded the back end on this so that we could play around with a variety of masses on the back of it. We've done these masses on the back of it in order to kind of control the rate of fire. So this thing's kind of like a cuckoo clock. You've got mass and you've got a spring. And one of the ways to slow a cuckoo clock down is to make the pendulum longer and that lowers the center of mass down the stem of the cuckoo clock. We can hear it ticking, but if we were to take the pendulum off of this, it'd run a lot faster. Listen. So less mass means the system, the spring mass system, oscillates at a much higher frequency than if we have the mass on it. So if we put it back on, we hear that. And then there's that. What this stud does is keeps this spring from getting all kinked up like this. So when we set the spring down in that, I'm actually going to reeve it up on a stud like that, shove it in, and then push the cap up. Now it's got an interrupted thread here. So you take that line, line it up with that line, push it all the way down, rotate, bang, we're together. Okay, so now, allow me to demonstrate. Let's get this thing upside down here and not beat it up too hard. Okay, so now we've got the gun upside down and I have the stock folded out of the way. When we're on the stud like this, we push forward with the trigger and it comes forward and it drops. It chambers around, shoves it up. The inertia of the firing pin and everything following it sets off the round. The bolt comes back and it throws the old round out, a fresh one feeds up and you go. Now, the bolt should come back enough that if you turn the trigger loose, it should stop. So there's a trap you get in here when we're playing with springs, in that if you make the spring too tight, it won't come back far enough. If you put too much spring in here, and it'll just sit here and diesel until it runs out of rounds. That's bad. It'll just run. So when you're doing testing on a gun that you've had completely apart, only put 2 rounds in the mag at first to make sure that this thing will actually stop. The other problem we're having is that it's actually running into the back right here. It's running into this, and I'm trying to get another spring made for this. Sidebar, 4 shows, 4 recoil springs, 4 bolt group springs. Not a single one of those suckers was the same. And that surprises me. Why? What I want to show here now is the interrelationship of the bolt to where the cartridges are going to be. So when we're doing this, I pulled the firing pin out of it, and I've got the mainspring laying over here on the bench. Trauma mag loaded with about 30 rounds. So this is what the interface looks like. The rounds stick right in there like that. And as the bolt comes forward, it's going to grab, let me relight this a little bit, right there. You can see where the back end of the bolt is grabbing that cartridge and shoving it off this way. And as it shoves it in, it would chamber it. Now I've got the extractor out so that you can actually see what's going on, because if I put the extractor in it, then you can't see the mo. But that's it. And this is how a Sten works, it's how a Schmeiser works, it's how everything else works. Grease M3, they all work basically the same way. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to go up, grab a cartridge in a chamber and didn't want to touch it with the firing pin. Well, that's why it's nice you got an independent firing pin. Firing pin gets damaged on a stem, you got to replace the entire bolt. Firing pin gets damaged on this thing, it gets replaced with something that somebody can make out in the field. So that's the interrelationship right there. I want to show you how that works. And back there, and we'll go back and we'll pull this out, and we're going to put this whole thing back together again. I've got 3 rounds in the mag because, as with any gun that we've taken apart, we want to make sure that it will actually stop. So that's kind of what we want to do, is just make sure that it'll stop when we take our finger off the trigger, and it's very obvious that there is a round in it. And this particular mag has only got 15 rounds in it or so. So even if it goes, we know that it'll stop when we turn it loose. And as we turn the trigger loose and squeeze it again, we know that we can get off multiple burns. This is awesome. We're going to get this back out to see an arsenal and let them watch it go the rest of the way. Something like that. No matter what you got, you can beat it. Given enough time and enough brain muscle, enough research, and a very large support group, and I thank everyone that supported me on this. This MP18 was about a 1-year-long saga, and we got her done and got it running, and now it's over to see an arsenal so they can do the history side of this, which I'll bet is absolutely fascinating. And as always, it's been a distinct pleasure to help you guys out. Thank you very much.